Willie Brennan is Irish and my best friend. His parents came from Connemara, where his father was a fisherman. When Willie was 2 years old, his parents decided to go to his uncle's house in America, Louisiana, to be exact. For the first 3 years, they lived in a mobile home while his father worked on a shrimp boat with his uncle. When Willie was 9 years old, his father became the owner of two shrimp boats of his own, and they moved to a nice house that happened to be 3 houses down from my own. He and I became fast friends and went through middle school, high school, and college together. I took the ROTC course and went into the U.S. Army right after graduating from college. Willie came to Connemara to visit relatives. He and his family, his father, mother, and 3 sisters, had traveled there regularly over the years. He ended up spending an entire year there with his grandmother. My first duty station after joining was BOLC, Basic Officer Leadership Course. The purpose was to teach basic leadership skills. It was a little rougher than what my instructors did at ROTC, but overall not too bad. After that, I was sent to Casto, Belgium for 3 years at SHAPE, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers in Europe, NATO's military arm, where I worked as the most junior and inexperienced officer on the staff. All NATO countries sent their best officers there because they represented their countries to the rest of the world. I felt extremely lucky and thought someone had made a mistake sending me there. I was there for 3 months and Willie asked if I could pop over to Connemara for a weekend. We hadn't seen each other since graduation, and I told him I could. Upon reaching transportation, I discovered that, contrary to what I had believed for most of my life, Connemara is not a city. It's a region. To get there, I flew into Limerick, where Willie picked me up and drove me to his grandmother's house in Clifton. The trip took a little over 2 hours. We drove over Galway Bay and through Galway itself, where we stopped for food and drink. Drinking with him, I started to drink quite often. The first time we tried alcohol was when we were 13 years old each. We got into my parents' bar, got horribly drunk, got horribly sick, and were horribly grounded. We didn't touch alcohol for a long time, so we were sitting in a pub in Galway, Ireland, and we were discussing the last few months. He told me that his grandmother was feeling well and was glad he was with her. She was trying to convince him to stay and introduced him to a couple of local girls. He had always been proud of his Irish background, but seeing him in this setting made him feel at home. His grandmother was wonderful, and even at her age, I could envision her as an attractive young woman. Some people, as they get older, sort of show their age, and it's not very complimentary. Others, on the other hand, age very well. Kathy Brennan was one of those. She could pass for Willie's mother, and she was socially active, and popular, very popular. She devoted most of her time to matchmaking. A couple hours' drive from Clifton was the town of Lisdoon Varna, and the largest matchmaking festival in the country. She had started a smaller festival in Clifton, but her goal was to make it even bigger than the one in Lisdoon Varna. Her first words to me were, "So you're the little asshole who keeps trying to lead my Willie astray." I don't know what he replied to her, but I liked her immediately. And so began a fun 2 days. I met a girl who was determined that Willie would stay in Ireland and marry her. Her name was Sophie, and both she and Willie had no illusions about what Kathy Brennan wanted. But Willie wasn't going to stay in Ireland, and Sophie wasn't going to leave. But they liked each other, and were one and the same. Sophie was born and raised in Clifton, so she had a lot of acquaintances. She invited some of them to meet me at her and Willie's favorite pub. And I wish I could say that Irish girls were free in their affections, but that wasn't the case. Not that I was trying very hard. Americans don't have a very good reputation in some parts of the world. So, as in Belgium, I behaved as best I could. That was one of the first things I learned at BOLC. We were instilled that no matter what country we were in, we were guests of that country and subject to its laws, and anything that might embarrass us as individuals or the United States as a whole would be frowned upon by both the army and the country we were in. So I tried to be a good guest. That first night I tried to buy drinks for our small group, but it was quickly explained to me that I was their guest. "I've known since I was a kid," Willie said, "that the Irish are a generous and kind people until you cross them. Then, you're totally screwed until they decide to forgive you." That night and the next, one of Sophie's friends and I stayed pretty close to each other. Her name was Maeve, and she was everything you'd expect from an Irish girl. Long, thick red hair, ruddy skin, a personality and wit that kept you laughing and guessing at the same time. As I was leaving to return to Shape, she came to Kathy's house to say goodbye. She took my phone and added her address and phone number to my contacts. I did the same for her. Then she kissed me on the cheek and left. During the 2 evenings I spent there, individuals or couples disappeared from our little group, and new ones appeared. On the first night, Willie told me that the Irish have a habit of leaving social gatherings by simply slipping away and not saying goodbye to everyone present. Apparently, it started with someone getting drunk and sneaking out to avoid embarrassment, but then it became a popular way to leave a gathering. It was called the Irish farewell, or the French departure. Maeve and I began texting and socializing with each other. For the next 3 months, several weekends I spent with her in Clifton or Limerick. For 6 months, Maeve and I saw each other whenever either of us could come to visit the other. At Shape, I loved my job and the familiar international setting. My desk was in an office with officers from Turkey, Italy, the UK, and Denmark. The officer from Denmark was a captain from Copenhagen and was what okay, maybe not you, but me, imagine a woman from Denmark to be pure, unadulterated beauty. Her name was Irene, pronounced Irina, and she seemed to get along with everyone in the office and everyone who came into the office except me. In her eyes, everything I did seemed wrong. After the first 2 weeks on the job, she and I just stopped talking. She was doing her job, and I was doing mine. At first, I tried to figure out what it was that was pushing her away so much, but I couldn't come up with anything. I wasn't a jerk. I treated her with respect. I didn't drool over her like so many people who dated her did. Watching her in action and listening to her convinced me that she was both fun and smart. She was also efficient and did her job well. She was respected for her abilities and appreciated for her appearance. I, on the other hand, was indifferent to her, and it showed. Other people in the office said I was the only person they knew, and it was obvious that she didn't care about me. Our job was to staff the paperwork. This meant going through the approval-disapproval process at international headquarters. Coordinating with all these different countries was challenging, rewarding, and fun. Anyway, after the first few weeks, I just said, screw it. She stayed in her little world, and I stayed in mine, both mentally and physically. We even stopped saying hello in the morning when we first walked into the office or wishing each other good night at the end of the day. Everyone else was cordial, respectful, and appreciated the help and respect we gave each other. One day, Mav came over for the weekend and we sat at my favorite bar right outside the back gate of Shape headquarters. We were leisurely devouring shawarma and wine when Irene walked into the bar with another Danish officer. We studiously ignored each other. After an hour or so, Maeve and I left and went to my cabin where we spent the night. Grandma Willie thought Maeve and I would get married, but it didn't happen. We lived for 9 months and enjoyed our time together, but then we drifted apart. Willie was still in Ireland but was ready to come home but was not ready to part with Sophie. Kathy didn't want him to leave, but he wanted to live his life, not Kathy's. Sophie, for her part, decided that if he was going home, she would go with him. I was best man at their wedding in Clifton. Maeve was there with her beau and introduced us. I was ready to go home too, so I did. I took a 2-week vacation and flew home. After a week, I was ready to return to Belgium. At work, an officer from Turkey had been reassigned and was returning to Turkey because his 3-year tour of duty was coming to an end. A large group of his friends and coworkers gathered at the bar at the back gate and held a farewell reunion for him. The bar was full. We served him drinks and he handed out boxes of delicious gelled national candy from Turkey called Turkish Delight. It was a pleasure to live and work in an international environment. I was welcomed into the homes of my coworkers, where I got to know their families and eat their food. Not a week went by that I wasn't invited somewhere. I lived in BOQ, Bachelor Officers' Quarters, in my own room. Irene lived there too, but at the opposite end of the building and 2 floors below, so I rarely saw her there. There was a kitchen there for general use, but I mostly ate at the officers' club or in the cafeteria in the headquarters building. There were always different smells coming from the headquarters kitchen. Most were pleasant, some were not, and some were just plain disgusting. The main store in the small shopping center on the installation was a grocery store called Bon Marche, which loosely translated meant good market or good deal. It was an amazing place to shop and very diverse. You could buy groceries and goods from all the NATO countries there. And I was due to meet at my Turkish colleague's farewell party in the morning, so I decided to take advantage of the Irish farewell and slipped out fairly early. The meeting the next day started early and lasted until almost lunchtime. I got back to my office just in time to lock my meeting notes in the safe and head to the cafeteria for lunch. I was just finishing my lunch when Irene walked by with another female officer I didn't recognize. To my surprise, she stopped. "Your predecessor never left a party early," she said sarcastically. Out of habit, I stood up to answer her. Maybe my predecessor didn't have an early meeting the next day, and maybe he was better prepared for his meetings. I looked at her, grinned, and said as pleasantly as possible, "Enjoy your lunch, Captain Bungard." Then I sat down. I did not watch them leave, though I had seen her leave many times and had always appreciated the sight regardless of my personal feelings for her. My personal feelings for her? What were they? I didn't really know. I didn't hate her. I didn't even dislike her, but at the same time, she hadn't given me a chance to like her, so I had no idea how I felt. I was still probably the most junior officer in shape. I didn't think too much about it and smiled sometimes because I still believed I was sent there by mistake and some poor clerk in Washington at the personnel center got in a lot of trouble for sending me. By the end of my first year, in addition to Maeve, I had met women from Italy, the UK, Greece, Portugal, and the US. I began to get looks and comments from other BOQ residents about my many dates and diverse assortment of women. Even the 3 Italian officers who lived here and were considered Casanovas referred to me as farfallone, which I heard meant womanizer or wife-beater. I considered it high praise on their part. Living in an international community had many pluses. BOC was a melting pot for single officers, both male and female. We had officers from 9 countries living with us. It was a very special place. The entire community seemed to embrace some of each other's holidays. American Halloween was a favorite for the children, and my married friends who lived in quarters at the unit enjoyed seeing children from all over the world dressed in costumes with original designs and concepts ringing the doorbell to get candy. The entire community also celebrated the German holiday Oktoberfest. This was one of the most popular and fun holidays. Thanksgiving? Not so much. There was no way the international community could understand the reason for this holiday. Christmas, on the other hand, was Christmas all over the world. I thought about going home for the holiday, but decided I'd rather spend the weekend with a German naval officer who also lived in Boca. She and I drove to Nuremberg to visit the Christmas market. This is the Christmas market in the central square of Nuremberg's Old Town. Stalls, lights, food, adventure, all at the same perfect time. The Brits know how to throw a big ceremony with pomp and circumstance, and the Germans know how to throw a party. We spent the weekend in Nuremberg just before Christmas. I didn't want to fight the hassle of traveling for the holidays, so I decided to stay at Shape, which essentially closed for a few days before Christmas. However, every department had to have someone on staff every day except Christmas, so our department head posted the schedule. We watched him put the days of the week in one hat and our names in another. First, he picked a day at random, then he picked a name at random. He picked Tuesday, and my name. Thursday, he picked Irene's name. Friday was Christmas. One officer, the one from England, never picked his name, so he was free all week. That week, we were only supposed to work on the day our name fell on. I heard Irene telling the others that she wanted to go home, but if she had to work on Thursday, it would be impossible. Damn. I didn't want to bargain with her because I didn't want her to think she owed me. Not that she owed me, but plus, if I worked all week, some of the others could go home for the week and not be late for work on my scheduled day. I walked into the department head's office. I'm not going anywhere on vacation. Why not give the rest of the office staff the whole week off? It'll be quiet around here, and I think I can handle anything that comes up. Are you sure? Yes, sir, just with one caveat. What's that? Don't tell anyone I volunteered to do this. Just tell them it's a cover-up. Are you sure? He asked a second time. Yes, sir. It was Friday. Just before the end of the workday, he came out and announced, "There's a change. I've revised the schedule for next week. Most of the big players will be away, there will be no urgent business, so you will all take the week off and be able to spend time with your families. Merry Christmas." There were cheers of approval, and a bottle of champagne and glasses appeared from somewhere. We all drank, wished each other nonsense, and got ready to leave. Irene hugged everyone and even wished me a Merry Christmas. I reciprocated, and they all left. The boss came out. "It's too early to be sorry," he said. "Everyone has already left, so you won't have time to change your mind." I smiled. "I won't regret it, sir. I'll enjoy the peace and quiet." He put his hat on my desk and sat down on the corner. "What is it with you and Bungard?" "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. She's the sweetest, most malleable person in the world, unless you're not around. Then she changes. It's not that she gets mean, but it's like she tenses up. Why is that?" I shrugged. "I have no idea. We haven't said a dozen words the entire time I've been here." "Well, something's going on. Between you and me, right after you arrived, she asked her coordinator to transfer her back to Denmark. They put it off as long as they could, but they found a replacement for her. She'll be leaving in mid-January. Like I said, I have no idea." "Good. She's good at what she does. I'd hate to lose her." It was Tuesday of the following week. I was alone in the office. A Danish officer walked in and smiled. "I assume today is your workday." I stood at attention. "Yes, sir." "What day does Captain Bungard work?" "She doesn't work, sir. She has the whole week off." "All week?" "Yes, sir." "Everybody doesn't work all week?" "Yes, sir." "And when is your day off?" "Friday, sir." It was Christmas Day. He started to leave and I started to sit down, but he turned and looked at me. I stood back up. He looked me over from head to toe and walked away. It was just after lunch on Thursday. I was going through a small stack of operational documents on my desk, checking to see if I had missed anything, when someone burst into the office. Looking up, I saw a German four-star admiral heading toward my desk. "Merry Christmas, Lieutenant," he said, extending his hand for me to shake, and I immediately shifted my attention. "Why don't you close this place down and go home?" "That's a good idea, sir. With your permission, that's what I'll do." "Good, you do that." And he disappeared. I followed him and watched him walk down the hallway and enter each office, clearly wishing a Merry Christmas to everyone he saw. There were 3 four-star flag officers assigned to the forma. The Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, SAC, was American. The Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, DAC, was British, and the Chief of Staff, CS, was a German admiral. I had met all of them and been in meetings with them, so I recognized the Chief of Staff. They were all very major figures in their respective countries and were considered the best in the world. Christmas Day fell on a Friday, and I spent it at BPC with others who had decided to stay. The weekend passed quietly until Sunday evening, when everyone started to return. I kept having to remind myself how different Europe is from America. From Belgium, where I was, to Rome, Italy, is a 15-hour drive. That said, you have to drive through parts of Germany, France, and Switzerland before you get to Italy, and it takes about 13 hours to cross the state of Texas on Highway 10. Many of those who served at SHAPE were able to travel home to their countries quite often. On Monday morning, everyone was happy and looking forward to returning to work. This was due to the fact that our work was very interesting. Most of the morning, everyone talked about their vacation. When the turn came to me, I didn't have much to say. I called my mom and my best friend. I found out his wife was expecting a baby. That was the end of it. "Didn't you go with Kristen?" Tommy, the British captain, asked. Kristen was a German naval officer I had met for a while and traveled to Nuremberg with. When he asked me, out of the corner of my eye, I saw Irene turn her back to us. No, she needed to be home with her family. A conversation about customs and traditions ensued. Irene never joined the discussion. She stood staring out the window until someone asked her opinion and she left the room apologizing. Another discussion ensued, started by an Italian man who asked me how many women I had slept with over the holidays, and continued with a discussion of the number of dates I had had since arriving at SHAPE and the reputation as a ladies' man I had built for myself. Everything came to a head when Irene returned. It was New Year's Eve, and the parties were up to my ass. Everyone was having parties. I was invited to 7, and I agreed to 2 of them. I went to the first one, but I never made it to the second one. The first one was thrown by our department head. It was mandatory. I couldn't refuse. There were about 30 people there, and it was held in a castle that he and his wife had rented as their home for 3 years. There was even a moat, a goddamn moat. In addition to our small staff and the spouses of the married trio, family and friends were invited. Many of them I knew from work. One of them I dated, but she was with someone, so I stayed away from her. I danced with 3 others, saw and said hello to all the guys I worked with. I even glanced at Irene, who was with an older couple. My boss, his wife, and I chatted for a few minutes and then dispersed to their guests while I continued to socialize. It was a fun party, and I really enjoyed socializing with such a diverse group of people. It was about 20 minutes after 11, and everyone was getting ready to welcome the new year. An older man I had seen with Irene earlier approached me and spoke in broken English. "You will pardon my words. I don't understand your language very well. Sometimes I don't understand anything at all." He hesitated, struggling to choose his words. "But I am trying very hard to tell you. She is right. I can see how you annoy her." He hesitated again before he spoke sternly. "Don't hurt my Irina again." Irina appeared out of nowhere, took his hand gently, spoke to him in Danish, and led him away. They only had time to take a couple steps before he turned around and said something that sounded like "Gavek." I felt a hand on my shoulder. "What did you do to him?" Tommy, my British office colleague, asked. "Nothing. I don't even know him." "I do. That's Irene's father, and I think he just told you to leave." "Leave? From where? For what?" "That's me, buddy. I want to get a drink and find my wife. She's a good kisser at midnight." He laughed and walked away. I didn't make it to midnight. Irene's father, seeing me, could have asked me to leave again, but it would have been more public and awkward for both of us. He looked at ease. And, not knowing how he would react if he had another drink and saw me again, I said goodbye to him once more in Irish. New Year's Eve, like Christmas, fell on a Friday. I didn't get back to the office until Monday. I went in first. My boss came in next. I thanked him for the invitation and told him how much I enjoyed everything. He was German, and we spent time talking about how much fun it was to socialize with different people. Irene was the last one in the office, and like any other day, on her way to her desk, she wished everyone but me a good morning. The boss called her into his office, and they were only there for a few minutes. When they came out, he gathered us together. "Irene is being reassigned. She'll be gone in 2 weeks when her replacement arrives. Until she leaves, it will be business as usual. Besides, as we all know, Captain Donati is returning to Italy at the end of the month. His replacement will arrive here next week. A lot of changes in a short time, but we can't lose sight of our mission. Let's get back to work." I went back to my desk and got to work, but stopped when Irene walked by. I watched her walk and enjoyed the view for the millionth time. I'll miss that image, I thought, but I'm damn sure I won't miss her attitude towards me. This week was even worse than usual. It was like she was rubbing my nose in the fact that she didn't like me. She used to just ignore me, but then she started showing her dislike in every way possible. Several times she would start a conversation with someone else, but would sit down on the corner of my desk with her back to me and continue the conversation. I worked there long enough to realize that bad manners are one thing, but blatant disrespect in any culture is a definite no-no. We all had boxes on our desks for incoming and outgoing documents, correspondence, reports, projects, etc. "Excuse me, but could you please not sit on my desk?" I said. She continued to speak, but standing up. She was talking to Tommy, a British man. He looked at me over her shoulder. Our gazes met and he rolled his eyes and almost smiled. The next day I got a call. "Lieutenant Parker, what can I do for you?" "I'm Captain Annika Nielsen from the tourist office. Do you have time for coffee? I have something I need to discuss with you." "The tourist office? Why do you need to discuss something with me? I haven't made any trips to Shape." "Please, Lieutenant, meet me in the cafeteria at 10. "How will I recognize you?" "Don't worry, I'll recognize you." She approached me as soon as I walked through the door. "Lieutenant Parker." It was a statement of fact, not a question. "May I call you Philip?" "Phil, please." "Okay, and I'm Annika. How about some coffee?" "What does that mean?" "Coffee first." We got our coffees, found a table, sat down, and stared at each other for a few seconds. Or rather, I stared at her and she studied me until I felt uneasy. "Captain Nielsen," I began. "Annika, please." "Annika." Are you familiar with the word doppelganger? She asked. Yes. Didn't know until recently. By recently, I mean the last month or so. My husband and I arrived in early December. We'd only been here a couple of days when we met Irene Bungard at a Danish meeting at the Officers Club. She and I immediately became friends, almost sisters. We've discussed many things since then, including personal things, and she gave me this. She held out the picture to me. I looked at it and then, like Annika, studied it for a long time. It was like I was looking in a mirror. The face I saw was my face. If I had an identical twin, we couldn't have looked more alike. Who was that? I asked. That was Irene's fiancé. Just before she arrived, he canceled their wedding and broke up with her. Damn, that answered a lot of questions. Actually, it only answered one, but that was all it took. Irene couldn't believe it when she first saw you and immediately disliked you because you reminded her so much of him, Annika continued. She pointed to the photograph. Even some of your, how shall I say it in English, mannerisms and the things you do without thinking reminded her of him. You know how you twirl your pencils with your fingers when you talk on the phone? Yes, I know, I do that. So does Frederick, her ex-fiancé. She knows a lot about you and you have no idea how much your presence here has affected her. At first she thought she could ignore you and live with it, but it's gotten worse, not better. And even though she likes it here at Shape, she asked to leave because of you. She paused and sipped her coffee. She's very ashamed of the way she treated you, but there's nothing she can do about it. She has a strong dislike for him and is taking it out on you. Why didn't she say anything? She was going to, but time went on and it got harder and harder for her. Do you realize that? Yes. Then it got worse because she was mad at herself for not doing it. Then she was mad at you for being the way you are, which she thinks is unfair. You need to know that it's not your fault. It's her fault. Oh, believe me, I know it's not my fault. You have to help her. What? You have to help her not feel so bad. If she leaves, she'll feel bad forever. Why should I? She treated me like dirt for a year and never thought about my feelings. And why did you get involved in this? Did she send you? She didn't send me, and she never will. Never. But she's my friend. You've only known her for a month. How much friendship can you develop in a month? Friendship develops quickly when there is sadness. Irene is sad. Sad for you because she treated you that way, but sad for herself too because she did that. Good. She can continue to be angry. I have no intention of helping her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to work. I got up and left. Irene was just walking down the hallway in the opposite direction when I came to the office door. I usually indicated to her or anyone else that she should go in first. I didn't do that this time. I opened the door and stepped toward her. It made me angry that I was being asked to help soothe her feelings while I myself was mistreating her. The day passed leisurely. I sat at my desk going over papers I wouldn't need for a few days. Every now and then I glanced in her direction, and a couple times I thought she was looking in mine. Screw it. I called Kristen to see if she was free for dinner. She wasn't free. The whole office joined in the discussion, and I distracted myself until it was time to leave. I went into BOQ, sent an email to Willie, and told him about my day. He replied almost immediately and laughed out loud. He knew about Irene, of course, and kept teasing me that I was in love with her. I told him to kiss my ass. In Europe, they usually have dinner later than we do in America, but I was used to it. So it was almost 8 o'clock that night when I sat down at a table in the Officers Club. I was just getting the menu brought to me when she came over to my table. Do you mind if I join you? She asked. I answered without hesitation. Yeah, I don't mind. I wouldn't want to eat with someone who treats me like I don't exist. Go and give someone else the satisfaction of your shitty attitude. With those words, I just looked at her. She stood like that for a few seconds and then said, You're right, of course. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. You remind me of someone I don't like and you don't deserve to be treated like that. I'm sorry. And she disappeared. The day she left, she came into the office to say goodbye. She hugged everyone but me and did the European ritual of a kiss on the cheek, and they all stood around her and said how much they had enjoyed working with her and how she would be missed. I stayed sitting at my desk pretending to work. When she was done with them, she stood in front of my desk, placed a flower in front of me, and left. There was silence in the office. Everyone was looking at me. Tommy, the British guy, came over. Do you know what this is? He asked. I looked up at him. I have no idea. It's a lily of the valley. Among other things, people give them to those they ask forgiveness from. I know this because I've given them to my wife more than once. I took it in my hands and smelled it. The next year flew by very quickly. Kristen and I started dating before her tour ended, and she returned to Germany. Not exactly Germany, but on one of the German ships. Willie, Sophie, me, and their son Philip, who is named after me, spent 2 weeks wheeling around Europe after spending time in Clifton with Grandma Kathy. It was early spring, and I was living out my last months in shape. Annika Nielsen and I had maintained a pretty good friendship and had coffee together a few times. One day, she called me. I thought I should let you know that Irene will be here on Monday. She is attending a planning group meeting and will be here for a week. She asked if you were still here. When I replied that I was, she asked me to ask if you could have coffee with her. I thought for a few seconds and remembered the lily of the valley. Please tell her yes. I will. 2 hours later, she called back. They're flying in Monday morning and their first meeting is at 1 o'clock. How about coffee at 11? That will be fine. Our meeting was a little awkward at first. We both took a long time not knowing what to say. By noon, we had relaxed a bit and were even smiling at each other. She was just starting to tell me about being dumped by her fiancé when she realized she had to run. In my office, Irene's replacement, another captain but male, was the only person who had worked here less than me. I was older than him in terms of time on shape, but he outranked me in that regard. All of them were captains or majors. I was still a lieutenant, but already a first lieutenant because I had gotten a promotion. Business was finished, and I headed to the Bach to rest before dinner. At the club, I was just about to order when Irene walked in, looked around, saw me, and came over. I stood that time. We're having a reception in one of the small rooms right now, but it'll be over soon. Would you like a drink afterward? She asked. Yes, I wouldn't say no. That evening, I heard the same story from her that I had heard from Annika Nielsen about her fiancé. I was so angry and upset and treated you so badly. I can never apologize enough, she said. My behavior was unacceptable and I embarrassed myself. The week she was there, we spent all of her free time together. Everything was fun except the last night before she returned to Denmark. Philip, that week was fun, but I still regret the time I wasted while I was serving here, but there's something you should know. Okay, what's that? I know you must be wondering if I think about my ex-fiancé when I'm with you. I know this because I've wondered that myself, and the honest answer is, I don't know. I don't think so, but you look so much like him, and I fell in love with him and the way he was that I don't know. You and him could be twins in so many ways. I really thought about it. I certainly didn't want to be his replacement, but I figured I'd never know for sure. The nagging doubt might have always been present. It was a moot point anyway, because the likelihood that this week would be the last time I would see her was high, because I would be back in the States in a few months. When we parted, I received the traditional kiss on the cheek and a warm, sincere goodbye. I finished my 3-year tour and returned to the States. I took a 30-day leave of absence before going to the Pentagon, where I was an operations officer. The same job I did in Belgium. Again, I was the lowest-ranking person in the office, and again, I thought it was a mistake. My boss even called HR to see if they had made a mistake and was told that no, they hadn't. He looked at me. Lieutenant Parker, it looks like someone has selected you for accelerated service. First at SHAPE and now here. I suggest you keep your nose clean, work hard, and get started on your master's degree as soon as possible. Sounds like you're getting somewhere. All you'll need after that is some time as a commander. And so I hit the road, from the office to another CCB and back again. Then I decided to rent a house. I rented it, bought furniture and everything I needed to furnish it. After years of living in one room of a CCB, I was relieved to be able to spread out. The working hours were long, but I had many weekends and vacations. I served there for 3 months before I realized I needed sex. The officers' club became my favorite place, but there wasn't much choice. I managed to hook up with another female officer and we became buddies. She outranked me by 2 grades and was 5 years older, but it didn't matter. Saturday evenings we devoted exclusively to entertainment. For almost a year, everything went well. Then I got a phone call. It was a friend of mine from the German Navy. She was serving on their training sailboat, and he was going to meet our training sailboat in Boston for a long weekend at a sailboat show. She asked if I could find time to meet her. I did. We met up, we said hello, we had dinner, and we went to bed. We stayed as long as their 3-day visit allowed. Another 6 months went by. I was doing well at work. Willie, Sophie, and my namesake Philip were doing well. We managed to visit every couple months, and he was still my best friend. My buddy and I still spent Saturday nights together, and life was good. Then Willie called and said they were moving back to Ireland. His grandmother was in bad shape and wanted to visit. He asked if I wanted to go with him. Things were urgent, and I took a 2-week vacation. On a hunch, I contacted my old office at Shape to see if anyone I knew was still there. It turned out that there were 2. I asked if one of them could contact the Danish Army Liaison Office to see if they could give me contact information for Irene. I left mine for them to pass on in case they were unwilling or unable to give me theirs. 2 days later, I got a call at the office. It was her. She was contacted by a Dane and gave her my Pentagon number. When I picked up the phone and she told me who she was, I was a little surprised. "I didn't know if you'd remember me," I said. She laughed. "Of course I remember you. I asked for your phone number several times from the Shape Communications Department, but they wouldn't give it to me." We talked about what we do in life, but didn't mention boyfriend or girlfriend. I told her I would be in Ireland for 2 weeks. "Can you come to Denmark? I'd like to see you." We discussed the possibility and decided we would meet in Copenhagen. After spending 2 days with Willie and his family in Clifton, I flew to Copenhagen. I was going to spend 2 days there, but it turned into a week. When I saw her at the airport, she hadn't changed physically, and there was a happiness in her that I hadn't noticed. "It's strange, but I was thinking about you, Philip, and I meant it. Not about that other guy we won't mention who looks like you." We broke off the conversation and just looked at each other. "Do you know when I first started looking at you differently?" "I have no idea." "That Christmas week you volunteered to work so everyone could have a break. I heard you did it after you found out that if I worked on the scheduled day, I wouldn't be able to go home for Christmas." "That wasn't the only reason. I remember other things too." "Like what?" "Like the party when Dad was talking to you. I went home for Christmas and they came back with me on New Year's Eve. I told them about you. And when I pointed you out at the party, my dad, who was a little drunk, decided he would talk to you and convince you to get out of there so I wouldn't see you. I apologize for that too." I chuckled. "It's okay. He was just looking out for your well-being. Like I said, I was going to stay for 2 days, but she and I had so much fun that I stayed for a week. On the last night, we got down to business. I wish I could say it was the best thing that ever happened in my life, but it wasn't. We were both trying too hard and it was rushed. We've both had better things happen. Fortunately, we had other opportunities to improve. For the next almost 2 years, we took turns flying across the Atlantic to visit each other. 3 years at the Pentagon came to an end, and I received orders to go to Germany. I sold my house, packed my bags, and left. I was a captain by then, and my new assignment was to USAREUR, U.S. Army in Europe, headquarters. Upon receiving the assignment, I remembered the words of my boss at the Pentagon that all I needed was command time, and I got it. Garrison Commander. It was a spot for a major, and I was a captain. Things were going well. Work was great, Irene was back at Shape, and we spent most weekends together. Our relationship grew more and more serious, and I enjoyed the trip to Shape, whether it was 5 hours by car or 4 hours by train. After almost a year of this relationship, she talked herself into a job as a Danish Army liaison to USAREUR headquarters, and we rented an apartment together. We were discussing the possibility of marriage when I got a call from the unit saying that since my 3 years of service in Heidelberg were almost up, I was needed in Afghanistan. Irene and I looked at each other, said a tearful goodbye, and I left. A month later, I was back in Germany, in a military hospital, but I didn't know it because I was in a coma. When I came out of it, Irene was sitting by my bedside holding my hand. She brought me up to speed and told me how I got there. 6 of us were in the car when we were hit. 4 of the 6 died almost immediately. The driver and I survived, but barely. They discussed the possibility of amputating my left leg below the knee, but apparently weren't prepared for the judgment in all 4 languages Irene spoke, which convinced them to wait and let me make that decision. After being given the choice, I decided to keep my leg, even though it would leave many scars and disfigurements, and I would walk with a limp for the rest of my life. Irene smiled when I told a whole battery of doctors about it. She took my hand and announced, "He can still dance with a limp, but he can't dance on one leg." I had no idea where that came from, since we hadn't danced more than a dozen times. I looked up at her. She leaned over to me and said, "I plan on us dancing for a very long time." Then she kissed me. I was in rehab for another month. Irene was present at every class, cheering me up and supporting me when I needed it. I had to return to Conus, continental United States, for further hospitalization, rehabilitation, and testing to see if my injury would prevent me from staying in the military. It took a long time, but I was able to convince them to allow me to stay in Germany for rehabilitation and evaluation. It took 3 months and a successful passing of the annual Army physical fitness test for the board to approve my continued stay on active duty. I was assigned to another staff position at USARUR headquarters. 2 months after that, Willie was best man at Irene and I's wedding in Copenhagen. In his broken English, her father told me he was glad I wasn't weg. We spent 2 years in Germany. We wanted more, but she had to go back to Denmark for 2 years. There was no job for me there, so I came back to the States. We didn't see each other for 3 months, and I flew to Copenhagen to spend a few days with her. I hate surprises, but I decided to surprise her. Bad idea. I knocked on her apartment door and a man opened it for me. I knew enough Danish to realize that good meant oh my god. We stood looking at each other for a full 30 seconds, not knowing what to say. Finally, I asked, "Hvor Irene?" After asking him where Irene was, I tried to go around him and enter the apartment, but he blocked my way. Hun her ikke. She's not here. For hun. Where is she? I squeezed my way into the room and looked around. He was standing in front of me, still trying to block my way and speaking in a mixture of Danish and English, which I wasn't listening to because I wanted to get to Irene and talk to her. The door to the bedroom was open and I headed towards it. It beat me to it, closed, and remained standing there. I knew it was the bedroom door because I had been there when she moved in. We heard movement in the room. He looked over his shoulder as if trying to peer into the room through the closed door. When he succeeded, I shoved him aside, opened the door, and stepped inside just in time to see the bathroom door close and hear the metallic click of the lock opening. I knocked on the door. Irene, come out." No response. "Irene, you have 10 seconds to come out and talk to me." I started counting. The man continued to gibber and I continued to ignore him. When I counted to 10, she still didn't answer. I turned around and headed for the front door. I picked up the bag I had brought with me and dropped it when the door opened, and I saw the man. An hour later, I was at the airport. The plane I arrived on had been cleaned and serviced and was getting ready to load and fly back. I had been in Copenhagen for less than 3 hours. The only available seat was in business class, but I didn't care. I handed the ticket agent my credit card, got my boarding pass, went through immigration, who stamped my passport without looking at me, and headed for the gate. 15 minutes later, I was boarding the plane, and then the phone rang. It was Irene. I ignored it. I entered my apartment, made my way to my bedroom, and collapsed on my bed. I had crossed the Atlantic Ocean twice and discovered that my wife had been cheating on me since the last time I stayed home for the night, so I went straight to sleep. I woke up still dressed, including my shoes. I undressed, took a shit, shaved, and showered, something I hadn't done since my short trip to Denmark. There were a dozen messages on my phone from Irene. I deleted them all without reading them. 3 months ago, when I returned to the States, I'd been reassigned to the Pentagon to the same position as the last time I'd been there. Barring my one command assignment in Germany, the operations officer position seemed to be my niche in the military. I was working on my master's degree part-time and was a year or so away from getting it. I showed up at my office the morning after I returned from Denmark, much to the surprise of my fellow office mates. I knew I was going to get the third degree from everyone, so I made a general announcement and told them what had happened. I received condolences from everyone, after which we all got to work. I immersed myself in mine, trying to compensate for... I don't know why, but I needed a distraction. 2 days later, I stepped off the elevator in my building, turned to my apartment, and was greeted by a barrage of Danish. Loosely translated, I was called an ungrateful, neglectful bastard who doesn't believe in his wife enough to give her a chance to explain what happened, and only a worthless, dog-eating son of a bitch could be that low. That was the only part I understood because she was berating me in the other languages she was speaking as well, so I had no idea what she was saying because I don't speak them. Neither did a dozen other people poking their heads out of their apartment doors to be curious about what was going on in the hallway. When she finished, she threw her passport at me. It hit me and fell to the floor. "Now, you son of a bitch," she said in English, "look at this." I picked it up. She came over to me, snatched it out of my hands, opened it, and started rummaging through it until she found the right page, then shoved it to me and pointed to the stamp. "What do you see?" Anyone who has traveled knows that when you enter a country and go through immigration, they stamp your passport with the date of entry. They also stamp it when you leave the country. I saw the stamp that she had entered the UK 3 days before I arrived in Copenhagen. She made sure I could see that, then snatched the passport out of my hands, found another page, slipped it to me, and pointed to another stamp. "What do you see?" It was a stamp indicating that she had left the UK just the day before. She lifted the book again, found the very last page, and held it out to me. It indicated that she had entered the United States that day. "So, rend mig dit rovel. Screw you, asshole. I'm going home and I never want to see you again." She walked back down the hallway to my apartment, picked up her suitcase and backpack, which were in the hallway by the door, and rushed past me to the elevator. The whole time I was trying to get her to stop and talk to me, but she wouldn't do it. Even while waiting for the elevator, I literally begged her to talk, but she ignored me. When the elevator arrived and the doors opened, she stepped inside, dropped her bags, and stood in the doorway, blocking my entrance. I tried to step over the bags, but she pushed me away as soon as the door closed. I rushed down 5 flights of stairs, but by the time I reached the end, she was gone. What am I going to do now? I thought. She put it very well. It could not be her in her apartment if she was in England, but who was there and why? I tried calling her many times, each time leaving a message apologizing and literally begging her to talk to me, but to no avail. I called Willie and told him my situation. He told me that, in his opinion, European women are different from American women to a certain extent. While some American women may try to cut your balls off, for the most part they will just cry and walk away if they are mistreated, misunderstood, or neglected. They will hate you and hold a grudge. But if his wife Sophie was an example of European women, it was best not to mess with them. Otherwise, you can hope that the least they will do is cut your balls off. Remember, Irene flew in from England just to show you that you were wrong, and I'll bet she's not done with you yet. My advice is to sit in silence for a while and see what happens. If you're lucky, she will cool down and forgive you. Your biggest mistake is the same one most men make. You immediately thought the worst and didn't give her a chance to explain. That's 2 strikes already, and you may or may not get a third. After all, she doesn't know anything about baseball or the 3-strike rule. I'm thinking of going after her. Do it at your own risk. Everything is still fresh in her mind, and you can only make things worse. Let her sit for a while. She may not like me waiting. She'll like it better if I start acting immediately. She may or may not like it. Pay the money and take your chances. Good luck either way. You know I'll be here to help you take whatever's left. And I knew I would. He'd been around for most of my life. A month went by and I hadn't heard from her. I figured if she was going to get a divorce, it would be in Copenhagen, since that's where we got married. Then I remembered something. It took me 3 days, but I was able to arrange to have 1 lily of the valley delivered to her apartment in Copenhagen. It took a week, then another, and another. There was no call from Irene. I tried calling her, but she wouldn't answer or pick up the phone. I went to the JAG office. They are military lawyers. They could not represent me in my divorce, but they could give me advice. The major I spoke to told me that since we were married in Denmark, any actions or procedures related to the divorce should be taken there. I emailed Irene, as she was not returning my calls, and told her that I was fine with whatever she decided to do. I just needed to know what it would be. Another 2 weeks went by and still no response. The 3rd week went differently. I rarely received mail. Like many other people, I did everything online. Weeks could go by without any mail showing up in my inbox except for promotional emails. But the day came when I received a divorce notice and a divorce petition. The original was in Danish, but there was a translated copy attached. In addition, there was a handwritten note from her. Philip, I have thought a lot and have come to the conclusion that our marriage was a mistake. And you made no effort to find out the truth about who was in my apartment. You just assumed I was there with him, and that hurt me deeply. Sign the papers and it's over. Irene. Lily of the Valley didn't seem to carry much weight. I signed the papers and sent them back. Shortly afterward, I was called into the supervisor's office. Captain Parker, General Thompson is being given 3 stars and sent to Italy. He needs a new adjutant. He has seen you and your work and would like to talk to you about the position. What do you think of it? I don't know what to think or say. You can say you're not interested. To be honest, I don't know that I'm not interested. In that case, he wants to talk to you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Make sure you're wearing a clean uniform. He smiled when he said that. He always said that when any of us were about to have a one-on-one meeting with a general officer. The interview went well, and a month later I was flying to Italy as adjutant to newly promoted Lieutenant General William G. Thompson. I had also recently been promoted to major. This promotion came as a surprise to me. Relatively junior captains were rarely promoted to major unless, of course, a 3-star general had something to do with it. Generals' aides have little social life that doesn't include accompanying the general, and often his wife, to the many events they are required to attend. We have been in Italy for 4 months now, and I have not had a single day other than Sunday, when I have not had something to do for the general. The military is a small world, and if you stay in it long enough, you tend to meet the same people over and over again over the years. In Italy, I ran into 2 officers I knew from my work in shape. General Thompson was having lunch with several dignitaries in a private room of the officers' club, and I was having lunch in the main mess hall nearby. Both officers came in, saw me, sat down at the table, and we had lunch. We reminisced about our days at shape and asked about those we knew there. You know, that hot Danish captain who worked in your office is back there, only she's a major now and married to an American named Parker. Lucky bastard, one of them said. The 2 looked at each other. Holy shit, that's not you, is it? I nodded. So you're married to her? The first one asked. I was, but we got divorced. Well, kiss my ass. There was a pause before he spoke again. Just out of curiosity, is she really as hot as she seems? Jesus, Tony, the second officer said. What kind of question does a man ask his wife? He just said they're divorced, so why can't I? They argued without coming to a consensus. Finally, the first of them, Tony, looked at me. So, Phil, are you going to answer that? I grinned. Sure. Think of the most beautiful woman you can imagine, and I can almost guarantee she's not as beautiful as Irene. Damn. Then why did you and her divorce? I told them the story. When was the last time you saw her? About 8 months ago. Does she know you're here? Probably not. I was at the Pentagon the last time we saw each other. Then next week will be a surprise for her. Why? Because she's part of the team that's coming here for 3 days to brief the staff. What team? The advance team for the NATO exercise in 3 months' time. That briefing isn't on General Thompson's schedule, I said. It's for planners only. He'll get a briefing when the details are finalized. We ate in awkward silence for a long time. I had several thoughts running through my head. The first was whether I should try to see her. We finished lunch just as I was informed that the general was finishing lunch and was about to leave. I went outside to make sure his car and driver were ready, and then went back inside as he was saying goodbye. Back at the office, I asked the executive officer if he knew anything about the briefing. We had only heard about it. They sent a for information only paper to brief him on the upcoming event. I was going to see if he wanted to meet the briefing team, just for jokes and giggles. That's always good for public relations. Do you have a list of the team members? Yes, right here. Can I take a look at it? Sure, but why the interest? My ex-wife might be one of them. Uh-oh, that can't be good, he said, holding out the list to me. Her name was second on the list as deputy team leader. Major Irene Parker. I held the list back out. Thank you. Oh, are you going to meet with her? No reason, so probably not. Do you want me to alert the general? No, just let me know if he decides to meet with them. Then, I'll tell him. The team for the briefing arrived on Monday. They were to have a 2-hour meeting with General Thompson's planning staff. General Thompson told his supervisor he would stop by to say hello at 2:15. The supervisor told me, and I went in to see the general and handed him a list of team members. I think I should tell you that one of the team members you will be meeting with this afternoon is my ex-wife. He looked at me, then at the list. I assume it's the one named Parker? He grinned. There was a mischievous streak in his character that I hadn't yet appreciated. My first question is, are you two on good terms? I don't think so. She hasn't spoken to me in months. That's probably fine. My next question is she competent at her job? When I worked with her, she was competent. I spent the next few minutes talking about my relationship with her. Well, would you like to accompany me to a meeting? He asked with a smirk. Some people are impressed if you work for 3 stars. Maybe she'd like that too. I laughed. I doubt it, but I'll open the door for you when you arrive. At 2:15, I opened the door to the conference room. The usher stood at attention and shouted, "Attention!" And the general entered the room and I followed right behind him. I stood by the door as he walked across the room to a seat at the head of the table. His subordinates sat on one side of the table and the brigade group on the other. He sat at the head and asked everyone else to sit down. Everyone sat down at once except Irene. She lingered for a second because she was looking at me. Even in the couple minutes that the general was talking, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that she was looking at me. When he was done, he asked the briefers to introduce themselves. Each stood up, gave their name, rank, country, and duty station. When it was Irene's turn, she stood up, stated her credentials, and sat back down. At this time, the general spoke. Ah, Major Parker, I understand you are familiar with my adjutant, who is also Major Parker. She stood up again. Yes, sir, we are acquainted. Then she sat down quickly. He finished his remarks, wished everyone good luck, said he looked forward to their report and got up to leave. When he got up, everyone stood up. Huther opened the door and the general walked out, holding me behind him. In the hallway, he turned to me. You sure know how to pick 'em, Phil. She's very attractive. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I only wish I could do it again with her. So you still have feelings for her? Yes, sir, I do. Then now would be a good time to check on her. I don't know, sir. She was very upset the last time we saw each other. In the mornings, I would drive to his house in my car. His driver would meet us there and take us to the office. In the evening, the driver would take us back to the house, turn the car into the motor pool, and I would get all the instructions I needed to get ready for the next morning. Then I would pick up the car and drive home. Things changed on those nights when he had social events. This happened at least 3 nights a week. I always left several changes of clothes, including formal wear, at the house in case of an unforeseen change of plans. That evening, the general and I spent a few minutes in conversation before I got in my car and headed to the officers' club for dinner. There was always a table of the evening's activities hanging in the lobby. The first item on it was the reception for the visiting shape team. I turned to leave. I figured I could get hot dogs in my room. The schedule was right in front of the front door, so I only had time to take a couple steps there and just as many back, but not in time. Phil? In the instant it took me to turn around, I mentally went over everything that had happened, and it all came down to the fact that I had made a very wrong assumption. Everything else was a consequence of that, so all the blame was on me. I could even understand her not accepting my apology. I turned around and saw her. Hey, Irene. Leaving already? You just got here. Yeah, I saw you had an appointment, so I figured I didn't need to be here. Not even to say hello? I just said hello. I was afraid to say anything else. My emotions might have betrayed me. We glared at each other. I wanted to apologize, and I had no idea what she wanted to say, if anything at all. Before we could speak, one of her team members spotted her and escorted her back to the reception area. I walked out and headed home. I decided not to eat hot dogs or anything else for dinner. We didn't talk to her again. She and her team finished their business and headed back to shape. The Friday after they left, I received a package from her via NATO courier. It contained an envelope from the same office that sent the original divorce and termination notice. It was addressed to me at my Washington address. My name was crossed out, and the envelope read, "No longer resides at this address." The envelope had not been opened. Attached to the envelope was a note from Irene. "Phil said I asked my lawyer to send this to you, but it came back. Now I know why. I was surprised to see you on Monday. I hope you are happy. Irene." And I opened the envelope and it contained the same papers I had signed and sent back. But this time it was accompanied by another note written in her handwriting. "Phil, I changed my mind about getting divorced. That's why I didn't send these papers. I guess I love you even when I don't want to. If you feel the same way, call me. Irene." I didn't have her phone number anymore, but I recognized her office number from the shape directory. "This is Major Parker," she said when she answered. "That too. I got your package. And? And I love you." I could almost feel her smile through the line. "There's a flight at 5 o'clock. I can be on it if you want." "What time does it land? I'll meet you." As we drove home on the General that night, I told him about the phone call. "I'm happy for you and hope everything works out. If you need to, take the weekend and Monday off. Just let me know." I waited for her to step out into the hallway. I wanted to enclose her in my arms, but I wasn't sure if it might be too soon. I shouldn't have bothered. She ran and threw herself at me. We blocked the path for a long time. Some guy said something in Italian as we passed. "What did he say?" I asked her. "He said, 'Get a room.'" We both laughed. On the way to my car, we held hands as best we could. My car had a standard transmission, so when my hand rested on the shift lever, her hand rested on top of mine. We didn't talk about anything. We just liked being around each other. 10 seconds after the door closed, we were back in each other's arms. We pulled away from each other, and I asked if she wanted something to eat or drink. We settled on wine. I poured each of us a glass, and we took a friendly sip and sat down on my couch. "We needed to talk, but where to start?" she said. "I was so mad at you." "I know and I understand. I'm sorry, but seeing him and thinking you were with him, I was just going crazy." "Me too. When he called me and told me you were there, I tried to call you to explain everything, but you wouldn't even pick up the phone or answer my messages. I figured you didn't read them. This made me even more angry. I was on a mission and couldn't leave. But as soon as it was over, I flew to America to see you. The whole flight upset me even more. Then you weren't home. I couldn't get into your apartment and had to wait for you in the hallway, and it got worse. I cried when I flew to you, and I cried when I flew back. I couldn't stop being angry, and I decided to divorce you. I told my sister, and she tried to calm me down, but I wouldn't listen." She hesitated for a few seconds, then continued. "I had calmed down a little by the time the papers you signed came in. My lawyer is my sister, who is smarter than I am. She didn't send them to court. She kept them with her. She and I talked several times, and each time I was calmer than the last. I realized I really didn't want a divorce and asked her to postpone the process until I talked to you. She said she never filed them. She was just waiting for me to cool off. I told you she was smarter than me." She paused again and sipped her wine. "I tried to call you, but my number was blocked, and I got upset again because I assumed you didn't want to even discuss, what do you call it, reconciliation. Then I sent you the papers, but they were returned because you were gone. I didn't know where you were or how to contact you." She paused. "And then I saw you walk in with the general, and it took my breath away. Yes, reconciliation is the word. At first I was just angry and upset. I never wanted a divorce, and after you came to Washington, I tried to call you, but you wouldn't answer." She smiled. "I ruined our first year together, and you ruined this year. We can't afford to mess anything else up." We both laughed. "No, we can't, and we won't." I took a sip before asking, "Who is he, and why was he there?" "He's my, as you say, cousin. He and his wife were staying here while their apartment was being painted. He opened the door, saw you, and at first thought you were Frederick. His English isn't very good, and he was nervous. He was at our wedding and saw you there, and when he found out who you were, he tried to explain. But he couldn't because of his English, and you wouldn't listen to him. When he called me, he was ashamed that he couldn't talk to you and explain who he was. We sat for a long time without saying anything. I finished my wine and got up to pour another. She saw what I was doing, finished the rest, and handed me her glass. As I poured more, she reached into her bag, pulled something out, walked back to the couch and sat down. I handed her the glass and sat down next to her. She set her glass on the table without tasting it and held out what looked like an old dried flower. When I got this, I cried with happiness, she said. This is the same flower you sent. The weekend went wonderfully. Sunday afternoon, I called the general to see if I could take Monday off. He agreed, and we added it to the best weekend ever. Monday afternoon, I drove her to the airport. Being an assistant general involves long hours and very little free time, but we took advantage of what we had. The trips between Belgium and Italy were frequent and fun. This went on for 4 months. One day, General Thompson called me into his office. Phil, Esther, his wife, and I are taking a 2-week vacation. We are going back to Cleveland to visit her brother. He's not very well. We'll leave on Friday. In the meantime, we want you to take a vacation too. Very sorry about her brother, sir, and I understand her desire to see him. I will take a vacation and spend it in Belgium. You won't have to do that. I talked to the general and told him I wanted Major Irene Parker at my headquarters, so she was transferred. She wanted it to be a surprise, but I hate surprises. She'll be here on Friday. Frankie, Staff Sergeant Frank Branford, his driver, will take us to the airport and you can stay here and wait for her. I thanked him warmly and left. The manager, admin assistant, and receptionist smiled when I walked in. I lived in the BOC where I seem to have spent most of my life, but 2 of us couldn't live there, so I went to the housing office to see if there was any available housing. Since I was the adjutant general, I was entitled to a house on the unit grounds. The only available house was in what was called Colonel's Row. I was neither a lieutenant colonel, much less a colonel, but I was moved there anyway. No one will complain, for you are the adjutant of the general, I was told. The house was furnished with government furniture, but it would suffice until Irene and I got our own. It was the middle of Friday afternoon. The general and his wife had already left, and I was sitting in my office kneading my fingers when she came in. I jumped up, walked over to her and kissed her. I got the impression you weren't surprised to see me, she said. Says who? General Thompson, and I'm glad he did. Let's go home. Her car was loaded with her things and she followed me to our house. She was surprised that we had a house. She expected that we would be cramped in my little BOQ room for a while. It's not the best house, but for the time we're here, it's home, I said. It's beautiful. The next 2 years were good. General Thompson was transferred back to the Pentagon, and he asked me if I wanted to go with him. Irene and I conferred and decided we would prefer to stay in Europe. The general understood and called Saussure again, who arranged for both Irene and me to be transferred back to shape. As Mel Brooks used to say, it's good to be king. In our case, we weren't the king, but we knew him, so it was close enough. We are now back in Belgium and have been living here for 3 years, but may continue to do so. Irene has been in the army longer than me, so she will retire before I do. When I retire, we will live in America, but will come to Denmark often to visit her family. Grandma Willie is still alive and well, but gets around in a wheelchair. Willie, Sophie, little Philip, and his little brother Sean have gone to live in Ireland. Life is good. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.